Our next guest, get the microphone sort of ready for him, is Governor John Hickenlooper.
Great. Thank you all for being here, and I don't think I've seen quite this much enthusiasm for all your local leaders, and knowing some of your local leaders, I understand the enthusiasm, right? And I think J.B. Shelton, I mean, he's got an energy, Rob Sand. These are the next generation, right? And you are right to support them. Now, I'm not going to lay into President Trump right off the bat. I had a rule when I was governor, which was up until 5 weeks ago, that I wouldn't let anyone in my office say his name. Because, you know, you can't just say something and have it take a couple minutes. Next thing you know, it's 20 minutes, it's 40 minutes, it's an hour, and you've done nothing but play into his hands. And I think that's got to stop, right? We've got to recognize that what matters is what we get done, and are able to demonstrate how little he has done. I came out to Colorado way back in 1981. I finished my master's in geology. It's going to be a geologist forever. Unfortunately, there was this pesky problem of a recession. It was an intermittent recession throughout most of the 80s. The price of all the commodities, gold and silver and oil, everything kind of tanked. Our company got sold in 1986. Everybody got laid off. And I can tell you, I was out of work for a couple years. You know, after about 8 months, you see a different person in the mirror. You don't have all the confidence you were used to. And like a lot of people who are so bitter today, there was no government process or support to try and help us think through a new profession, a new career. I ended up with a couple friends. We went down to the library. I mean, I was a geologist, you got to keep in mind. Got a book on how to write a business plan, and I started a brew pub, a restaurant that brewed its own beer. And this was a notion that was so unknown. It took almost 2 years to raise the money to start the thing. I couldn't even get my own mother to invest. And the rent in at that time, what they call lower downtown Denver, was an abandoned warehouse district. The rent was $1 per square foot per year. So I thought the risk was low. Finally, after a couple of years, we got the thing open. And we were a big hit for a little while, and then went down for a little while. I know there are a number of entrepreneurs in this room that know what that's like. At one point, I had to borrow money from my older brother. Never a good idea. Even when you pay the money back, there's a debt that never quite comes due. We did right from the beginning. I had never worked in a restaurant, but I went out. We were the first restaurant to open in downtown Denver in 5 years. There were only about 6 other restaurants in the neighborhood at that point. And I put up ads for them in our vestibule. I went to the other restaurants and said, hey, if we start working together, we could do a lot better. And so soon we were buying pint glasses together. That first summer we created something called the Lodo Brewers Fest, even though we were the only brewer. We ended up getting, all of us chipped in, and we bought a group ad in the Denver Post with a little map. It said, come down to lower downtown and pick one of these great restaurants. And my staff said, Hick, you're crazy. This is a dog-eat-dog business. You can't promote the competition. And I said, well, maybe the other restaurants aren't the real competition. Maybe the real competition is the TV set. And our job is to get people off the couch, out the door, to enjoy life with their family and friends. And if we all work together, we'll create a rising tide that helps all of us. Well, one thing led to another. All of a sudden, we started doing better. We opened one up in Fort Collins. We opened another brew pub in Colorado Springs. I ended up we opened 15 brew pubs, mostly all over the Midwest. We did one in Omaha, Des Moines, Rapid City, Green Bay, Wisconsin, just in case you thought we were leaving out the really big cities. And by working together, we found a way to try and take these abandoned buildings and create a business, but also create community. Now, in this process, you know, you got to keep in mind, I grew up a skinny kid. I had like thick Coke bottle glasses. My mom was widowed twice before she was 40. My dad died when I was 8. And so I didn't have a lot of confidence when I was a kid. And I certainly never ran for student council. Now I'm going to guess that all the other candidates that you see as potential presidential candidates, all of them probably ran for class president, right? Except one. That would be me. I was the kid that always tried to keep everyone else together. I was kind of the peacemaker. One of some of the kids teased me and called me Switzerland when I was a kid. Anyway, my customers in my restaurants hated every elected official. Every city council member, every state senator, every congressperson was a bum. And I kept saying, wait a second, this is America. They are us. If you're that unhappy with them, you should run. You should represent us. And somehow they twisted that and used it against me. And so I ran, in 2003, I ran for mayor. And Denver's a strong mayor city against 4 lifetime public servants, talented people. And I made a commitment that I would only run a positive campaign. I wouldn't do any negative ads. I wouldn't attack my opponents in any way. I never have. I never will. And I made a commitment. At that time, Denver, which was about 20% of the metro area, hated the suburbs. Or at least that's what everyone said. And everyone said the suburbs hated Denver. Everyone said that. I made a commitment that Denver would never be a great city without great suburbs. And if I got elected, we'd do everything we could to help lift up those suburbs. And all the professional political consultants said, you're a loser. You know, the people of Denver are never going to vote for somebody who's talking about sharing the sacred water rights with your suburban neighbors who everyone hates. Well, it turns out the people of Denver didn't hate the people of the suburbs or vice versa. The politicians hated each other. I got elected with 65% of the vote. And I went right to work. I went right to work with those suburban mayors. I went around and I went to them, right? I didn't want to be the alpha dog. I went to their offices and talked about trying to create an initiative, and we had terrible traffic problems and congestion, an initiative that would help attract young people and entrepreneurs to our community. And we decided on something we called Fast Tracks. We got a Fast Tracks fan here in the front. Fast Tracks was the largest transit initiative in the history of the country, 122 miles of track. And it required a 0.4% sales tax increase, very serious. We got all 34 mayors, 2/3 of them Republicans or independents, to support that tax increase and to support Fast Tracks. Right? No one's ever done it before. It passed 55% to 45%. And if you fly out to Denver now, and you take the train in from the airport, and you get to Union Station, you'll see what has become the fulcrum for one of the most significant urban revitalizations in the history of the country. And I think, based on that, again, Governor Ritter, my predecessor, decided he wasn't going to run for a second term. And I decided to run for governor, and I made the same commitment. Rather than the suburbs, I said if I became governor, and at this point, Colorado was 40th in job creation. I said if I get elected governor, I will lift up our economy, but not just the urban front range. We'll make sure we don't leave the rural places behind. And everyone said, well, you know, the urban people aren't going to go along with that. You're never going to get elected. I became the first Denver mayor in 130 years to get elected governor of Colorado because people did want that collaboration. I think today what we're facing is a crisis of monumental proportions. Right? People, Americans, are frustrated by the inaction of Congress, but I think they're terrified about what the next thing President Trump is going to tweet. And I think we're probably more divided than at any time since the Civil War. And I think we're more bitterly partisan on more different issues than probably any time since the founding of the country. And I think unless we are able to come together and find ways to find ways to get to common ground and really work together on solving some of these big issues that are facing our country, we're toast. right? I mean, that's not a very political, inspirational thing to say, that we're toast, but we are, right? In the playground vernacular, we'll be doomed. I think, others have great ideas and visions. We need visions, right? We need dreamers. I think awful lot of people in Congress are great at coming up with visions. They're great at debating the issue. We need dreamers and debaters. I'm a doer. And I think the one thing that is different about me than just about anyone else running is I have a long, consistent record of being able to bring people together, get them to put down their weapons if they've been feuding, and then find that common ground, achieve progressive solutions and progressive goals, and move on to the next event. And I'm not talking just about the restaurant owners, of bringing them all together, or reaching out to all the mayors. When we got them all together, we agreed that we would no municipality would ever offer an incentive to lure a business from one place to another, poaching employees. Never do that, right? Why should we give these stupid goals to businesses, these incentives? It's like welfare for businesses. We looked at the potential of what are some of the biggest, most challenging things we could do by working together. And we looked at healthcare. If you remember, I worked with John Kasich. And no, I would never run for president with John Kasich, just so we're clear. But I needed a Republican governor to go out and say that we governors are the ones who implement health care, and that we can save the Affordable Care Act. And if you look at John McCain, before he cast that deciding vote to protect the Affordable Care Act, he said, right, that maybe we should look towards governors who implement these programs and look for them for direction. And then 4 days later, he voted to protect the Affordable Care Act. So John McCain was a valuable ally. But we had already at that point, with bipartisan effort, we had been able to expand Medicaid in Colorado. We have the most innovative and I think the most successful healthcare exchange in the United States. We have insurers now in every single county in Colorado. And we are now at the point where we are getting very close to 95% coverage. Wow. And I think we have to look, and there's a big battle now, and it's a great thing about Democrats, we are opinionated, right? And we're running the risk, though, of, are you for Medicare for all, are you for single payer? Almost every single Democrat I know is for universal coverage. Yeah. So let's focus on getting universal coverage and all come together and say, that is our mantra. Let's get that done. And then, once we get into office, then we can work our way through and see, all right, what is the way to get higher quality health care, and to figure out the most cost-effective way to deliver that health care and get universal coverage. We were able in Colorado to go and bring the different sides together to get, in a purple state, we're the first purple state to get universal background checks passed and get large capacity magazines limited to 15 rounds. And I will tell you that, I made the mistake, that was a pretty tough battle. I had made the mistake of complaining to my son, Teddy. At that point, he was 11 years old. And that's just a terrible mistake. He said, Dad, what do you do at work all day that's so hard? Make decisions? I said, well, Teddy, it's not that easy. He goes, Dad, get the facts, make a decision, check, next. I said, wait a second, Teddy's not, Dad, get the facts, make a decision, check, next. He goes, every day I go to school, I learn something completely new I didn't know existed the day before. If I don't get it perfect, the next day is misery, because everything's based on the day before. After 5 minutes, I said, you're right. 5th grade is harder than being governor. But I think we went back and we got the facts on, we had the national facts before we got into the battle, but we'd never gotten the facts on Colorado, right? And the previous, before we raised that initiative, 9 months before, we had that fateful shooting in the Aurora movie theater. And I was on that scene the next morning. in the mobile headquarters looking at the videotape of the crime scene. It was one of the most sobering experiences in my life. And when we came into legislative session 9 months later, the first thing we did was we put $30 million additional money to health care, mental health care, right? Because we have a mental health epidemic in this country right now, and we are not responding to it. We have the symptoms everywhere, whether you're talking about opioids or heroin addictions. You look at mass shootings, almost every one of the mass shootings is an expression of suicide. So we need that, but we also need to get universal background checks because that is the basic ante if we're going to have safe gun laws. And after Teddy chewed me out for not getting the facts, I came into the office and I said, what are the real facts in Colorado? In the year before, in 2012, getting to half the gun purchases with a state of about 5 million people, 5.5 million people. As the Republicans said, are crooks really that stupid? You know, the Republican legislators said, well, crooks aren't stupid. They won't get a background check. Well, we went and got the facts. So getting to half the gun purchases, 38 people convicted of homicide tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. 133 people convicted of sexual assault, 620 burglars, 1,300 people convicted of felony assault. That's where someone usually goes to the hospital. All tried to buy guns, and we stopped them. There were 420 people who had a judicial restraining order not to see their ex-spouse or their ex-boss. They tried to buy a gun, and we stopped them. And just in case you don't think crooks are stupid, 138 people, when they came to pick up their gun, we arrested them for an outstanding warrant for a violent crime. I'll give one other example of where we got people to come together who normally don't work together and don't get along. You know, we have a fair amount of oil and gas activity in Colorado. It's a real concern for anybody who cares about climate change. Climate change has got to be, I think, one of the most important things any of us can do. I think it's just unspeakable that we haven't gotten further. What we did in Colorado, you realize the worst climate change pollutant is methane. And for a long time, people haven't paid attention to it. The oil and gas industry didn't pay attention to it. And so there's a guy named Fred Krupp who runs a thing called the Environmental Defense Fund. And he said, Hickenlooper, if you're anything, if you're worth your salt, which I hadn't heard anyone say that in years since my grandfather, he said, you'll be the one that takes these guys on. Well, when I talked to the oil and gas guys, they said, well, we're not going to do that because your friends in the environmental community, they're going to lard it up with red tape. We're going to waste money. We try to address methane emissions. You know, we won't get any credit. So I went back to the environmental community. I said, listen, Fred, and I went to talk to the other leaders in Colorado. Are you willing to make sure it's lean and effective regulation without a bunch of red tape? And are you willing to make every dollar count? And are you willing to share credit? It actually took a day for them to decide about sharing the credit. But they came back. And we got everybody in the same room. And the first couple of months, I spent most of my time getting them to put down the weapons because these two groups of people hate each other. It's worse than Coca-Cola and Pepsi, I guarantee you. And their history of stabbing each other in the back and mistrusting each other is unbelievable. But we finally got through. After 14 months, we created the first comprehensive methane regulations in the United States. And we got the oil and gas industry to pay for it. Right? They paid $60 million. It's the equivalent of taking 320,000 automobiles a year off our roads. And I really believe, assuming that and we haven't made a final decision, but assuming I get into this race, and I almost feel it's a calling in a very real way. I feel like I'm the one person that has actually gotten people together and got stuff done. That I really am a doer, and I have this long, consistent record around that. And I woke up in the middle of the night about, I think it was 3 weeks ago, and luckily my wife was awake. My wife is the senior vice president of a $75 billion company, senior vice president of corporate development. So you don't mess with her, and you certainly try never to wake her up. But she was awake, and I looked at her, and I said, sweetheart, I just woke up, and I realized that beating Donald Trump is absolutely essential, but it is not sufficient. Right? We have to look at where we're going to go and get past this, because once he's beaten, we've still got a bunch of these issues that we're going to have to step up and deal with. And I think, my mom was, as I said, widowed twice before she was 40. She grew up in the Depression, so she never bought a dress. She sewed everything she wore. She would wash tin foil so she could reuse it and tape it to the refrigerator door when I was a kid. I'm not making this up, right? And that level of grit and resilience, she would tell us kids, and again, she was widowed twice. She would say that you can't control what life throws at you, but you can control whether it makes you better or worse, whether it makes you stronger or weaker. And we've got that choice right now, whether we're going to rise up to this challenge that we all face. And I think back to when I was first running for mayor. And the first 5 or 6 weeks, I didn't move anywhere in the polls. I had all these young volunteers that were kind of getting discouraged. And I found this little newspaper clipping in the Denver Post about a professor of public speaking at the University of Wyoming. And he was talking about the importance of using opposites when you speak publicly. He said, if you're going to talk about the worst of times, talk about the best of times. If you're going to talk about the agony, talk about the ecstasy. The words gain power by being together. And he asked his class, what's the opposite of despair? The kid looks up and says, joy? He goes, exactly. You want people to feel despair, use joy in the same sentence. They get emotional impact by being close together. Then he said, what's the opposite of woe? And a kid way in the back goes,
Giddy up.
Giddy up! And I think, it's a dumb joke. But it's a good joke because in most cases, the opposite of woe is to giddy up, right? And especially if we can use that frame, if we can giddy up and do it together, if we can create the unity, we can do anything. Thank you very much for your time.